Hello, my name is Kate Crowley and I work for the University of Edinburgh. I'm going to be talking to you about adaptation. What is adaptation? Well, it's a process of adjustment to climate change now and also going forwards in the future. We know that climate change is going to bring serious impacts to our lives and our livelihoods, and we need to make sure that we don't just reduce emissions in terms of reducing greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but we also need to take other measures to adapt to the changes that we're going to see and that we're experiencing at the moment. Now, adaptation is not just a one-off thing. It's something that we are going to have to revisit time and time again as changes continue. And so adaptation is about modifying our decisions, our activities, and our way of thinking to adjust to climate change. And it's about building our capacity. It's about ensuring we have the resources and the knowledge to overcome some of the challenges we're going to face going forwards. And it's about ensuring that everybody is included in that process. So all knowledge is important, not just scientists or politicians, but everybody. Everybody has knowledge and experience, skills, and different perspectives that are really important when it comes to adaptation. Because adaptation strategies are only successful when they're appropriate for the context, both economically, but also culturally as well. Now, there are some basic steps in terms of adaptation, but the first one is understanding the impacts we might face. And this requires an understanding of the threats, so the hazards, such as flooding or drought, our vulnerabilities, so how we might respond to those hazards, and our capacities as well. So the positive sides, what are our resources? What can we do? Now, adaptation can happen in small steps, so adjusting our crop types, maybe improving our drainage systems to overcome flooding, or we can take some more serious steps in terms of changing how we do our livelihoods, putting in place early warning systems, or building flood defences, for example. We may also have to take more radical steps, large changes, such as managed retreat, moving an entire community away from the hazards they face, maybe away from coastal areas that will be affected by sea level rise. We might need to change how we plan our cities and take these radical steps for change. One of the most significant things we need to do going forward is around planning. It's around planning our urban environments. More and more people are living in cities, and so we need to make sure that these cities are built to be resilient to the threats that we're likely to face. This image shows how a new build can make way for water. Think about how flooding and surface water runoff can be captured and stored. Here you have a pond and you have a nice green space in the middle of your urban area. This will help hugely, not only in terms of flooding, but also during heat waves. It will help to provide cooling spaces for people who live in this city. We also need to think about our livelihoods and also how we access fresh water. A really good example of some of the challenges around that is from Bangladesh. There are communities there that cannot access safe drinking water because sea level rise has meant that the water that they normally get from wells has become too salty, too polluted. And so they're using new technologies powered by solar power to provide fresh water for them. So desalination plants, for example, like the one in the photo behind the lady who's standing with her child. This is a solar powered water filtration system to help improve access for very poor communities to fresh water. Or it could be changing crop types, experimenting with new crop types, new things that will withstand drought or floods. But we need to make sure that the discussion includes everybody, because if we're going to prepare for major events, everybody needs to be safe. And so here in Bangladesh, women and people with disabilities were excluded from a lot of discussions around disaster management and emergencies. And so they were very vulnerable during major cyclone events or floods. And so communities have got together to prepare for disasters better, including all of the people in the community, making sure that everybody is aware of what to do when the early warning system goes off and where to go. And this makes a community a lot stronger. But it's also not just about understanding what to do during an emergency, but it's also thinking long term and improving people's capacity to adapt in the future. And so helping people have a range of livelihood options in Bangladesh has really helped build their resilience. We also are seeing people needing to manage their water and food supplies in many countries around the world. And a good example is in Malawi. In 2002, there was a major drought event, and this led to around 20,000 deaths. Now, what local people were experiencing was not just droughts, but also intense flood events as well. So it was a real combination of different hazards that were affecting people's ability to access fresh water and grow crops. And so there was a range of initiatives that were put into place, helping to trial crops that were resilient to droughts and improving early warning systems. Now, early warning systems are really important, but there's an even more basic step that you can take to help communities, and this could just be providing weather forecasts. So an example from Kenya is that farmers are now getting access to the national weather forecast. This is on a daily basis, but it also could be looking at seasonal trends as well. And so by bringing different stakeholders together, in this case, farmers with the weather forecasters, actually they were able to create their own local weather forecast using local knowledge and experience together with the more scientific knowledge. And this helped to improve their farming practice. And so an early warning system for drought doesn't just mean the scientists coming in with their information, but it means coming together and sharing knowledge between different stakeholders, between different people, to try and find the best way of communicating the best information and then taking action on it. So we've spoken a little bit about how we need to make sure that adaptation is inclusive, that we share knowledge, that we share information, but we also need to think about how we look to the future. And so if we're building something now, we need to think about how it's going to be working in the future. And a really good example of this is the Thames Barrier that protects London from flooding. Now, the Thames Barrier is an awesome piece of infrastructure, and it's one that protects millions of people from flooding every year. But when it was built, it was only designed to close and protect London from high tides and storm surges, maybe once a year. However, in the 1990s, it was closing 40 odd times or up to 100 times. And so what we were seeing was an increased use of the barrier. Now, the Environment Agency who look after the barrier are saying that if they have to close the barrier more than 50 times a year, then the barrier is going to start to fail. And it takes a huge amount of money to keep the barrier going. And now there's a big question being asked. How much longer can the barrier protect us under new sea level rise and new flooding? And so a decision needs to be made by around 2050. And at the moment, the government is working through a process of deciding what is the most cost effective, but importantly, what is the most effective mechanism for protecting London and saving the Thames Barrier. And so we need to think about adaptation alongside what we call mitigation. Now, mitigation is around reducing the emissions, so reducing the hazards we face directly by reducing the emissions, the gases that we pump into the environment. So we need to have adaptation measures that do not increase emissions. That would be counterproductive. So for example, on the top left image there, you've got people who have put in place air conditioning units to try and combat rising temperatures. But this is not what we should be doing, because this is increasing our energy demand and increasing emissions. On the top right, We have a building that is more sustainable, has a green roof, thinks about drainage for flood events, is low carbon. This is the kind of adaptation we need. We need to think about adaptation and emissions at the same time. And so critically, when we're thinking about adaptation, we need to make sure that we have a really good understanding of the context and of the impacts that we're likely to see. So risk assessment is really crucial. We need to make sure that anything we're building now or retrofitting now is taking climate change into account, whether that be through new land use planning rules or making incentives for developers to think about more resilient and adaptive designs. What's really important is that we are making decisions now, not just to protect ourselves and protect our own livelihoods, but for future generations as well. Thank you so much.